1972 World Championship. Bobby Fischer really shook things up with his opening.
Sicilian defense, a notoriously aggressive opening.
So instead of reacting to Spassky, Fischer's basically saying, nope, we're playing my game.
Exactly.
Those first few moves that can make or break you.
And let me tell you, it's a lot more than just moving your pawn 2 spaces forward.
It's about setting the tone, dictating the terms of the battle.
Every pawn push, every knight maneuver, it's all part of a bigger plan. It's about controlling the battlefield from the very start.
Chess openings. Today, we're diving into Bruce Pandolfini's chess openings, traps and zaps.
Oh, a classic. You're looking to trap your opponents, right? Especially in those D2, D4 openings. This book's got you covered.
Pandolfini's a legend. Not just this book, but Bobby Fischer's outrageous chess moves. Principles of the new chess.
Oh, and Kasparov's winning chess tactics. Don't forget that one.
Right. He's done it all. But in chess openings, traps and zaps, it's like he's giving a masterclass in turning blunders into your advantage.
And he lays out these sequences so clearly. They're almost like crystallized thought processes,
It makes those openings much less intimidating, for sure. Now, he uses algebraic notation, which I know can seem like a whole other language.
But it's really not that bad.
It's like a chess GPS. Letters for the files, numbers for the ranks.
Exactly. Like he shows in the book, E4, that means moving a pawn to the E file, 4th rank.
Easy.
Don't get too caught up on that crystallized thing, by the way.
Yeah.
Openings, they're not static. You got to be ready for anything.
Good point.
I mean, an opening can go 10, 15 moves, sometimes even more.
Yeah.
And each game, there's always going to be variations, wrinkles you got to watch out for.
So how do we keep from getting overwhelmed? What's the key?
It's about understanding why a move works, or why it doesn't, in a specific situation.
Not just memorizing a bunch of lines.
Exactly.
Now, Pandolfini breaks the game down into 3 phases: opening, middle game, end game. And he really emphasizes that the opening is the foundation of your game.
It's so true. I mean, think about it. If your foundation's shaky, the whole house is going to come crashing down anyway. No matter how good you are in the middle game or end game, if your opening's a disaster, game over.
Plus, wouldn't it be amazing to just win right out of the opening?
Who wouldn't want that?
Imagine 10, 15 moves you're checkmating your opponent just from knowing the right traps.
That's what we're here for.
And here's something interesting. Pandolfini loves those double king-pawn openings.
You mean like the Queen's Gambit, Scotch Gambit? He's all about that action.
Exactly.
And, they tend to be a bit more beginner-friendly, I think, especially when you're just getting started with these opening traps.
They're a bit more intuitive, right? More straightforward.
And way more fun. I mean, who wants to be stuck in those slow, closed positions for ages?
Talk about boring.
Open games, that's where it's at. More piece activity, more chances for those gotcha moments. But, big but, you got to watch out for that king safety.
Because things can get wild pretty quickly.
Oh, absolutely. Especially in open games. One wrong step, and suddenly your king's caught in the crossfire.
It's a delicate balance. Speaking of which, we've laid the groundwork, so now let's dive into the fun part. The traps and zaps themselves. And we're focusing on the early D2, D4 complex chapter today.
Packed with good stuff.
One thing that Pandolfini points out again and again is that bringing your queen out too early, it's almost always a bad idea.
It's like sending in your best player before the rest of the team is even warmed up.
Exactly. Like in example 5, the center game, black, sets this really sneaky trap.
And boom, white's queen is forked. All because they got a little too eager.
Patience is key.
Big time. Your queen, you want her to be this powerhouse in the middle game, not stuck defending herself in the opening.
Speaking of defending, let's talk about king's safety. Pandolfini gives a great example in the Goring Gambit, example 17.
Oh yeah, black gets totally greedy in that one. Goes after some material, forgets all about their king. That checkmate.
Ouch.
Just like they say, protect the king at all costs, no matter how much material you have. It means nothing if your king's hanging out there vulnerable.
Right. Now, the Scotch Gambit, that's where things get really interesting. Pandolfini uses examples 19 and 20 to show how crucial time and coordination are in the opening.
Black wastes so many moves with their knight in those examples, like just shuffling it around, not really contributing to any kind of plan.
Aimless.
Meanwhile, white's over there, developing their pieces efficiently, coordinating their attack, and boom, game over.
It's like they say in chess, time is of the essence.
Every move counts. You can't waste any on those meaningless maneuvers.
So true. Every move has to have a purpose, right? A goal in mind.
Absolutely. Otherwise, you're just handing your opponent a free pass to build up their position, and then you're in trouble.
And Pandolfini gives us a ton of other Scotch Gambit examples. Example 22 with that incredible unpin leading to checkmate.
That one's a beauty.
Example 23 where black's bishop is just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
A positional nightmare.
And then there's example 25 where black's queen gets completely trapped after trying to be too clever.
It's a trap fest.
Yeah.
But that's what's so great about these examples. It's not just theory. It's real-life situations, things that happen in actual games.
And by studying them, we can avoid those mistakes ourselves.
Exactly. But more importantly, you start to develop that spidey sense, that tactical awareness, where you see those traps coming a mile away.
And then you're the one setting the traps. It's like you're learning to read the board on a whole new level.
Absolutely. You start to anticipate your opponent's moves, see those traps before they even happen.
Exactly. Now, I know we've only scratched the surface of Pandolfini's early D2D4 complex chapter. What other traps and zaps does he uncover?
Well, he's got this great example. Example 26, another Scotch Gambit. Black ends up losing a rook, but it's almost beside the point.
Because they're already down a queen, right?
Well, no, not quite. They lose the rook, but it doesn't even matter because white's about to deliver checkmate anyway.
Oh, wow. So another case of being blinded by material.
Exactly. And again, it's that early queen development that gets them in trouble. They just can't resist trying to grab a few pawns, and it costs them the game.
It's a common theme, for sure. Now, you mentioned something earlier about example 28 and in-between moves. What are those exactly?
Those are sneaky. It's like, imagine an exchange is about to happen, right?
Yeah.
But instead of recapture immediately, you throw in this other move.
You create a distraction.
Exactly. You might attack a different piece, or maybe you develop a new piece, creating a sudden threat. And now your opponent, they have to react to what you're doing.
Instead of just following through with their initial plan.
Exactly. It disrupts their whole flow, you gain the initiative, and maybe even turn the tables completely.
It's like a chess fake-out. I like it.
It's a good one to have in your back pocket.
Now, speaking of throwing your opponent off balance, what about pins?
Oh, those are essential. Pandolfini gives a great example in the Scotch Gambit. Example 29. Black tries to get greedy with their queen, going after a pawn on e4.
But it's a trap.
Oh yeah, big time. White's bishop pins the queen to black's king, and suddenly that pawn doesn't seem so tempting anymore.
Talk about stuck between a rock and a hard place. So the lesson here is don't get so focused on winning material that you forget about the bigger picture.
Exactly. Always be aware of those potential pins. They can change the entire course of the game in a single move.
And sometimes it's not even about falling for a trap, right? Sometimes you just make a bad move. Like in example 32, what happens there?
Oh, that one's a classic case of one step forward, two steps back. White pushes their f-pawn to f4. Looks like they're making progress, but
they're actually weakening their position.
exactly. They weaken their king side, open themselves up to all sorts of attacks. It's a good reminder that every move has consequences, both immediate and in the long run.
You always have to be thinking several moves ahead. Speaking of which, we talked about open games versus closed games. How does that come into play with these traps and zaps?
It's crucial, especially when we're talking about king safety. In those open games, remember, the king's more exposed.
Right. More room for those pieces to fly around.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's exciting, more potential for attacks, but the risks are higher too. One mistake, and it could be game over.
Makes sense. So it's all about knowing your own style, right? What kind of positions do you feel most comfortable playing?
Exactly. Some people thrive in those wild open positions. Others, they prefer a more controlled strategic game. It's all good.
Whatever works for you. Now, let's finally talk about those sister openings Pandolfini mentioned. The Bishop's opening and the Vienna game.
Ah, yes. Two sides of the same coin, he calls them. They both start with one e4, e5, but then they branch off in totally different directions.
Right. The Bishop's opening, historically, it's been considered a bit weaker, right?
Yeah, it tends to encourage that early queen development, which we've already established is usually not a good idea.
And Pandolfini even gives us the Frankenstein-Dracula variation as an example of what not to do.
Oh, that one's a classic. White gets way too greedy, and it costs them dearly.
So what about the Vienna game? How does that one compare?
The Vienna game, starting with 2 and c3, it's generally considered a much sounder opening, more flexible. It focuses on controlling the center with the knight, avoiding that temptation to bring the queen out too early.
So it's a bit more measured, more strategic.
Exactly, but don't underestimate it. The Vienna game can get really sharp, really tactical, as Pandolfini shows in example 33.
Right, black gets this beautiful queen fork. highlighting how important central control is and the power of those double attacks.
It's a great reminder that even in those seemingly quiet openings, there's always the potential for fireworks.
Pandolfini also throws in this fascinating historical tidbit about the Vienna game. Did you know it actually predates the bishop's opening by almost 1,000 years?
Isn't that amazing? This opening that we think of as more modern actually has roots going back centuries.
Love it.
It just goes to show, chess theory is always evolving.
Always something new to discover. Now let's dig a little deeper into the Vienna game. You mentioned it's all about control of the center.
Exactly. And Pandolfini makes this great point. He says Black's third move, knight to c3, might seem unassuming, but it's actually a really powerful move.
Strengthens their hold on the center.
Right. And from there, White has so many options. They can solidify their center, or they can get aggressive, push their f-pawn, really challenge Black's control.
So even though it starts out slow and steady, the Vienna game can explode at any moment.
Exactly. That's what makes it so interesting to study. You never know what's going to happen next.
Now, I love how Pandolfini talks about how the Vienna game and the bishop's opening, in some variations, they sort of converge into this super highway.
Oh, that's a great analogy. It just shows how interconnected all these openings are. Like, you could take different paths, but ultimately they can lead to similar strategic themes.
It's like having different maps that all lead to the same destination.
Exactly. And it's up to the player to choose which route they prefer.
So even though these openings have been studied for centuries, there's still room for personal style, for creativity.
Absolutely. That's what keeps chess so fascinating, right?
Yeah.
There's always something new to explore.
Now, ready for a change of pace? Let's talk about the King's Gambit.
Oh, one of my favorites. Always up for a good King's Gambit.
It's like the most aggressive opening ever.
It's a wild ride, that's for sure.
Pandolfini actually gives some great historical context here.
Yep.
He talks about how popular the King's Gambit was in the Romantic era of chess.
Oh yeah, back when players were all about those daring attacks, those brilliant combinations.
And the King's Gambit was like their weapon of choice. He mentions that even world champions like Spassky and Fischer played it.
And not just played it, they won with it.
Exactly. Which just goes to show it's not just some gimmick opening. It's a legitimate weapon if you know how to use it.
For sure. So, what are the main ideas behind the King's Gambit? What's White trying to achieve?
Well, as Pandolfini puts it, it's all about seizing the central terrain and placing the enemy king in jeopardy.
So basically, control the center, attack the Black King.
Exactly. It's a bold strategy, that's for sure.
Not for the faint of heart.
But before we dive into the specific traps and zaps of the King's Gambit, I think it's important to remember that it's a risky opening, too.
Oh, absolutely. It's a double-edged sword. If Black knows what they're doing, they can launch a pretty devastating counterattack.
So you can't just sacrifice that pawn blindly and hope for the best.
Nope. You need a plan. The King's Gambit requires careful calculation, a willingness to take risks, but calculated risks.
It's like high-stakes chess.
That's a great way to put it.
Now, are you ready to see the King's Gambit in action? Let's dive into some of those traps and zaps. All right, let's get into it. What kind of chaos can we unleash with the King's Gambit?
Well, Pandolfini starts us off with a warning. Example 56. White makes a couple of careless pawn moves early on, seems harmless.
But it's never harmless in the King's Gambit.
Nope. Black seizes the opportunity, launches this devastating attack, ends with a knight promotion, checkmate. Brutal.
It's not enough to just sacrifice the pawn. You got to know what you're doing.
Exactly. Those early pawn moves by White, totally aimless, no plan, no coordination, and most importantly...
They forgot about their king.
Exactly. Speaking of which, check out example 57, another King's Gambit accepted. Black plays it safe, keeps their pawns connected, seems like a solid strategy.
But it backfires.
Big time. White launches this quick attack, and it's checkmate before Black even knows what hit him.
Wow. So even playing it safe can be dangerous if you're not careful.
Oh, absolutely. It's all about finding that balance. Attack, defense, knowing when to push, when to hold back.
Now, how about that queen? Surely you don't want to bring her out early in the King's Gambit.
You know it. Example 60. Black falls for the oldest trick in the book. Brings their queen out early, tries to stir up some trouble.
But it backfires.
Oh, yeah. White's just waiting for that opportunity, and boom, Black's queen is out of the game.
Another case of look before you leap, or develop before you deploy, something like that.
Exactly. Now, example 61, this one's interesting. White actually has a chance to take a pawn, seems like a good deal, but they hesitate.
Your decision?
And it costs them. Black seizes the initiative, launches this crazy attack, even sacrifices their queen.
Whoa.
And it pays off. Checkmates white with a knight fork.
Spectacular. So sometimes you got to take those risks.
Absolutely. Calculated risks, of course. You can't just throw pieces around willy-nilly.
Right. Now, example 63. This one made me laugh. Black's development is just non-existent.
I know, right? It's like they forgot how to move their pieces. All their queenside pieces still huddled together on the starting squares.
Talk about a traffic jam.
White just walks all over them. Another easy checkmate.
Proof that development is key.
Essential. You got to get those pieces out, supporting each other, controlling the board.
Speaking of control, example 64, Black gets fixated on grabbing pawns.
Classic mistake. Tunnel vision. They forget about everything else.
And it costs them, right?
Oh, yeah. White develops their pieces, coordinates a beautiful attack. Black's material advantage means nothing.
It's not about how much you have, it's how you use it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, this next one, example 65, this is where Black tries to get a little too clever. They're trying to sacrifice their queen and then win it back.
Sounds complicated.
And it blows up in their face. The king's left wide open, and White delivers a quick checkmate.
Ouch. Sometimes simple is better.
Sometimes the simplest plan is the best plan.
So true.
There.
Now, let's look at example 67, another king's gambit accepted. Black actually has a decent position here, but then
Greed gets the better of them. They get fixated on this one pawn, and it costs them everything.
White launches a counterattack.
And it's devastating. Another reminder, don't count your chickens before they hatch.
Patience, patience. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. What about the king's gambit declined? Any traps there?
Tons. Example 70. Black makes this seemingly harmless capture with their knight, but it weakens their king's defenses.
And White takes advantage.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful checkmate with the bishop and knight.
It's like a work of art.
It really is. Now, example 71, this one's sneaky. White plays this quiet opening, almost passive.
But it's a trap.
Exactly. Black walks right into it, falls for a series of exchanges, and suddenly their queen is trapped.
Gone. Just like that.
That's a good reminder. Always be on the lookout for those hidden threats, even the quietest positions.
Now, example 72, this time Black tries to exploit a pinned knight, but
Overreach. White manages to turn the tables, wins back their piece, and ends up with a much better position.
it's like a chess judo move.
Exactly. Using your opponent's momentum against them. Now, ready for something a little wilder?
Always.
Example 75 takes us to the Falkbeer counter gambit. Black sacrifices their queen.
Whoa. That escalated quickly.
But it works. White's king gets caught in a mating net. It's over.
Wow. So even sacrificing the queen can be the right move sometimes.
Absolutely. If it leads to a checkmate, of course.
Makes sense. Now, example 78, another Falkbeer counter gambit, but this time
White makes some questionable queen moves. Dodge again. And Black, they seize the opportunity, create a devastating pin, and launch a winning attack.
another reminder. Be careful with that queen.
She's a powerful piece, but she can also be a liability if you're not careful.
So true. Now let's wrap things up with example 87. This one really highlights the importance of balanced development in the king's gambit.
Black sacrifices a pawn, but they gain this huge developmental advantage. Their pieces are just swarming all over the board.
White can't handle the pressure.
Nope. Black wins another one.
So we've seen a lot of crazy attacks, sneaky traps. What are some of the key takeaways you've learned today?
Well, first off, that queen. She's trouble in the opening.
Keep her locked up.
Exactly. And king safety, always be aware of your king.
Especially in those open positions.
And most importantly, have a plan. Don't just move pieces around randomly. Every move should have a purpose.
And that's what I love about Pandolfini's book. He doesn't just show us the traps, he explains the reasoning behind them.
Exactly. He helps you understand the why, not just the what.
So, are you ready to go out there and start trapping some opponents?
I'm ready to unleash some chaos on the board.
That's what I like to hear. And remember, even if you fall into a trap yourself, don't worry about it. Analyze your mistakes, learn from them, and come back stronger next time.
Exactly. Every loss is a learning opportunity.
Well said. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive into Bruce Pandolfini's chess openings, traps and zaps.
Until next time.
Keep those minds sharp and happy chess playing.